our Journyx and Journyx PX 9.5 new features webinar. My name is Meredith Zachritz, and I'm the Director of Product Management here at Journyx, and I'll be walking you through this webinar today. So we'll start with a feature overview and then move on to our demonstration of each feature that I covered in the overview, and then at the end I'll open up the floor for questions and answers. Now you're welcome to submit your questions anytime during the presentation today as you think of them. Instead of using the answers section of the go-to panel, I'd ask that you use the chat section and select to send that chat to organizers and panelists. I am a panelist today, so the only way I can see your questions is if you also send that chat to panelists. So please do that for me, and then I'll be able to read off your questions and answer them at the end of our presentation. So we'll jump right into the content. 9.5 offers a variety of new features. One of the biggest feature areas that we have are some new costing and billing rate options, and they give you a lot more flexibility than the current user and project-based rates. So we have some new project activity rates, some assignment rates for those of you who use Journyx PX, and then new reporting and financial calculation options that go along with those rates. We also have a couple of new features that are intertwined. As many of you may know, if you use the mileage entry screen today in your Journyx system, we have now given you the option to move that mileage tracking onto expense entry, where technically you might say it belongs based on reimbursable employee expenses, as it is just another reimbursable employee expense. And so we'll go through how you can do that in 9.5. Tied to that, the mileage tracking screen then becomes something that you can use for custom entry, and we'll go through some of the use cases there, the possible ways to use that screen. There are also a set of features that will help with your data validation, making sure that your employees get their time entered accurately and make it easy for them to do so. And these include access to projects by the type of entry screen, some different handling of the way we do hidden default values, and also some new column dependencies that complement the project dependencies that you already have access to. And then lastly, we'll look at some of the small user interface changes that just make some of these screens easier to use. So let's go ahead and jump straight into our view of 9.5. Now, I will be showing 9.5 features today in some detail, but we'll also provide a very detailed guide for how to set these up and use each of these features as part of the 9.5 release in November. So no worries, you don't have to come out of here knowing exactly how to use these. This is mostly about how they're used, why you would use them, and then you can use that guide as well as the Journyx Professional Services team to assist you in implementing any of the new features. Now, in previous versions of Journyx, you could track your hourly rates for markup to get your labor costs and billable project amounts, and you could do this by either using rates per user or employee or rates per project. In 9.5, we have two new alternatives for tracking hourly cost and billing rates, and the first option is available in both Journyx and Journyx PX, and it allows you to associate an hourly rate with a project activity combination. Now, you may not call these columns, these are the first two tracking columns on your timesheet, you may not call them project and activity on your employees' timesheets, and that's fine, but it would still apply to these two areas. But the rates are created by selecting a value in each of these columns and associating the rate with the two selected values. Now, most customers who will be using the new project activity rates will be tracking something like a project role or function in that activity column. So the user is selecting his project and the role he's performing on the project, or perhaps the type of work, from the first two columns. And then based on those selections, his time is associated with a pay and or bill rate for the project activity combination. In addition to capturing things like contract rates that vary by the type of role or work performed, the project activity rates also let your employees do project work under different roles or categories all in the same day. So someone may switch back and forth between, say, like a project manager role and a developer role, each with different applicable rates during the same period for that same contract or project. Now, unlike a single project rate, the project activity rates allow you to capture those different rates associated with each type of work. So as you can see, when you create a new rate, it looks very similar to other screens that you've seen in your Journyx system. You can select a project activity combination. You have the option to create a description, or you can leave that up to the system. It will generate it automatically. So this is just basically letting you know if you have, for example, rates that will vary by date, a rate that might be valid for 1 year that may increase each year, you could label that description appropriately to indicate that it's for 2014 or 2015. And then, of course, you can have start and end dates associated with your rates. And this determines, so if I select the current start and end dates that we have here, September 9th, what this means is that anybody who enters time for this project an activity combination will get these rates associated with that time that they enter on September 9th. So that's where I should say the records that apply to September 9th. They could enter them tomorrow for September 9th, but it will still apply to September 9th. So it's the date of the record that will apply these specific rates. And so I can go ahead and create rates and give them date ranges. So why don't we do something through the end of the year, and that is how they'll be applied to the time that's entered. You don't have to do both a pay rate and a bill rate, but you have that option. So perhaps we only are concerned about a bill rate in this case, so that's all I'm going to enter. And I can create my rates. Now I cannot create a duplicate rate, the same project, the same activity, that conflicts with another date range, and it will notify you if you happen to accidentally overlap one that already exists. And then the main management screen looks similar to the management screens that you're used to seeing, where you can see the project and activity associated with each rate and the date range under which they apply. Now, before we move on to options for reporting on these rates, so users have entered time, they've entered these project activity combinations that will trigger these rates. We're going to go ahead and look at our other new rate option, and that's where you can track cost and billing rates by assignments. Because the reporting options are going to be the same for these new rate types, we'll go ahead and look at how you get them into the system and start tracking them first, and then we'll go to reporting where we can see how both of these are available. Now our assignment rates are only available in PX, and that's because PX is the only system that has a concept of an assignment where an employee is explicitly assigned to a project task. Now, if you're familiar with custom fields in the Journyx system, then you will recognize these, but assignments get their rates via the custom field process. And so we can see when we go to look at the different types of custom fields that assignments now have the option for that assignment bill rate and that assignment pay rate, just like we see for users and projects in the Journyx system. Now the custom fields can also apply for other information, not just the rate information. So for example, I have a custom field set up for assignment role, and I can track that information and report on it in the same way. The custom fields will also be used to determine your rates and allow you to do your financial calculations based on those custom fields. So when you make assignments to your project tasks, you can then set the values of these rates and other assignment custom fields. So let's select one of our projects and take a look at the assignments. Again, these are all projects in Journyx PX, so if this doesn't look familiar to you, if you don't have PX, don't worry, we'll be moving on to the reporting section for rates in just a moment. Now, for any work that has been assigned to someone, like this assignment that I selected here, you'll be able to see your custom fields and edit them appropriately, either fill them in if it's a new assignment or change them as necessary. You can see some of the different information here. Now, in addition to the wizard view that allows you to review all that user allocation information before you make your assignments, 9.5 also includes a new list management screen for assignments. We'll go and take a look at that. And again, this is going to look very similar to the management screens that you're used to seeing throughout the product. And what this does is it makes it easier to edit many assignments at once, because we have, similar to other screens, we have compare and mod capabilities where I can select many assignments at once, and I can go and make changes. So I could fill in all my rates at once here, or if a rate change occurred, again, I could go and edit all of my rates right here on this screen. Now, assignment rates are a little bit different than the project activity rates in that you can associate them with a specific project employee combination instead of just the project activity combination. While the employee can't track two different types of work with different rates for the same task on the same day, like we could for those project activity rates, some customers will do a breakout of the project tasks by the type of work or role to be performed. So employee 1 could be billed as a developer for task 1 at one rate, and employee 2 could do the same type of work for the same task at another rate. Now, after your users have logged some time against project activity combinations or assignments with those different rates, you can then report on these rates and run cost and billing calculations in the standard reports in Journyx. So as we can see here, a basic time report, we can see our project activity rates associated with each piece of work, and we can see the project activity combinations that triggered those rates. And this is similar to what you can do with the user and project rates as well. We'll run another report here to show assignment rates and assignment custom field information that we can also include in our time reports. Now, you can also use these new rates to run cost and billing calculations, such as those that are available in total cost reports. Let's take a look at one of these. And we'll look at how we modify these. So you have the option to choose which type of rate to use for costing and also which one to use for billing. Now, you can blend these rates. I could use a user rate, for example, here, and a project activity rate for billing. In my examples, I'm just using the new rates so that we can take a look at how they're available. But basically, I have the option for how to calculate my total cost and total billing in these reports, and I have access to these new rate types here, so that I can run the report and see my financials based on these new rates. Look at the one based on assignments too. And then, of course, with the time report for detail below, so that I can see what rates I'm using to calculate my total cost and my total billing. Now, I can also report on all of these new rate fields in Report Link. So let's just take a look real quick. For those of you who use Report Link in Excel, all of these fields are available in your time feed for the project activity rates, and then in your actual versus projected and assignment feeds in Journyx PX. So I have an example here of an hourly report by project and user. And what I did is I added a calculated field. I used the user pay rate as my cost, and then I used the project activity rate for my billable amount. But I have the option to use any of the fields available. So I could have, for example, another calculated field that uses the assignment rates to determine my billable amounts. And then all of these fields, as you can see, are available in the pivot table data that I bring over with report link. So it's really your option, depending upon what you use for your, how you manage your costing rates and your billing rates, to determine what calculations you use in your financials. So a lot of flexibility here to see things the way that you need to see them. So that wraps up the rate flexibility portion of our features. We're going to go ahead and move on next to a new option to track employee reimbursable mileage on the standard expense entry screen. So let's go back here and log in. It's one of our end users. So if your employees currently track mileage on that separate mileage entry screen, you can continue to do this if this is working well for you. There's no reason for you to switch to this new methodology unless you prefer it. But in 9.5 you have the option to track mileage just like all your other employer reimbursable expenses on the standard expense entry screen. And it makes it easier to follow standard accounting practices that bundle and treat mileage as just another travel expense for reimbursement. It's also handy for sending data over to your accounting packages like QuickBooks, because it sends it all over as an expense, as it should be. Now, when entering mileage or distance traveled on expense entry, employees can simply choose the distance traveled option, or options if they have more than one, from the expense code list. So we'll create a new entry. And I have several different options here, but I have one expense code set up that is allowed to be entered as mileage. And so I'll select that one. An employee reimbursable, and this is set up through an expense code custom field. So there's a custom field associated with mileage that says that this is eligible for mileage entry, and that's all that you need to do to make sure that they can enter mileage on their expense entry screen. So when they go to enter their expenses for a mileage type of expense code, it's going to look a little different. It's going to notify them that they're entering mileage. And so I can enter, however many miles I drove, and it's going to show me the rate that applies to this, and that's based on your conversions that you have set up. And when I save it, it's going to convert it to the expense amount so that everything is consistent in terms of being shown as currency here. But again, I can click on it at any time to see what I entered in terms of miles. I can hover over it to get that same information, so I can always access what I originally entered. If I happen to enter it incorrectly, I can correct it. But essentially it's a special field that will have the mileage and distance information associated with it so that they can refer back to it. Then I can simply go to my expense report and see my mileage information as the converted currency amount, as well as report on the raw mileage amount and the rate. And these two fields are new. For those of you who've been using Journyx for a long time, you may know that the mileage amount was appended to the comment in previous reporting, and this just makes it a little bit easier. It is now its own separate field, makes it easier for reporting and export to other systems. Now, since we're offering the option to track mileage on the expense entry screen, this can free up the old mileage entry screen for other types of tracking. Some of you may have already repurposed the mileage entry screen for alternate methods of, say, time tracking, widget tracking, or equipment tracking. In 9.5, you can completely customize the screen to fit your custom tracking needs. In my example here, I've set this screen up for equipment tracking. So what we do here is employees who track both their working time as well as usage of equipment can use the equipment tracking screen to capture things like hours of operating heavy machinery, or maybe feet of pipe laid. So the information on this screen then provides equipment utilization data for measuring wear and tear, as well as conversions to billable amounts. And because you can set up conversions based on the units field, this used to be your measurement field, employees can then track equipment with different types of units all on this one screen. Then the conversion can translate all of the units into one currency for billable amounts. So we see here that we have, for example, a generator that's tracked in days, and so it was operating on this site, for all of the days of the week. We have a truck that is measured in miles, and then a part that's measured in feet. And the employee is simply entering the unit amount. But when we go to the report, we can see everything in the currency amount, so the conversions that they have set up. So we can see that that generator for 1 day is $35, and we get this in dollars, and so on and so forth. Now the custom entry screen now has its own reports. In previous versions, because it was used to track mileage, the information tracked on that screen was included in standard expense reports, which made some sense. But as a custom entry screen, they require their own reports, and so all the information tracked on the screen is included in a new report type specific to the screen. We can see it here, right there. So they have their very own reports that allow you to show the information either as it was entered or converted to currency. I'll go back in as an admin. Now, the next set of features is all about making sure it's easy for your employees to enter their time correctly. The first one of these data validation features allows you to control on which types of entry screens a specific project will be available for entry. So let's take a look at this one. In previous versions of Journyx, projects were available on all types of entry screens as long as the user had access to the project. So in 9.5, you can specify which types of entry screens should apply to a specific project. This can come in handy for situations where you want users maybe to enter time against a project, but there should be no expenses logged. Another obvious case, as we're looking at here, is for our paid time off placeholders. Project placeholders that you use for tracking your time off. Obviously, a paid time off placeholder wouldn't be appropriate for expense entry. Also, you have the option to restrict paid time off to leave entry only. So we could potentially say that your employees could not enter their leave time directly in their timesheet, but would have to enter them as leave requests, and so they would only be loaded onto the timesheet if they were approved. So you do have that option now by using this project availability feature. When you upgrade, all of these will be checked for all of your projects, but we can assist you with getting them adjusted if you'd like to adjust visibility for your projects based on the type of entry screen. Now, another data validation feature in 9.5 involves how we handle hidden columns on our entry screen. And if you're not familiar with this, that's fine. Like I said, our upgrade guide will walk you through this in detail. In the past, you were only allowed to have a single value that filled into that field by default if you hid the column from your entry screen. So for example, I might take bill type off my time entry screens for my employees, and so any time that they entered a time entry, the bill type for those entries would be filled in with billable, because that's my single default. In 9.5, you can now replace the single default value with project and column dependency values if the selections in the entry have dependencies associated with them. So that default will change if, for example, I select a project that only has non-billable associated with it via the dependencies. So that's a nice thing that might allow you to, in many cases, we have customers, for example, who have a one-to-one relationship in the bill type column to the project selection. And so they really don't need to show that on their employee time entry screens, but they had to in order to get the correct values. So this allows you to hide that field if your dependencies will fill in the correct value for them. And then the last new data validation feature is the option to create column dependencies or filters. Sorry, moving too fast. There we go. So Right now you can filter your selections in the other columns on an entry screen based on the project selected. Column dependencies allow you to take this one step further and filter based on selections in the other columns. So my project choice might filter what I can see in my other 3 lists. Then my activity choice might further limit what I can see in the other 2 columns. There's not a screen for setting these up like you would see with project dependencies, so they need to be configured using the import for this feature. Again, the Journyx Professional Services team will be happy to assist if this is something that you're interested in using. The last set of features we'll take a look at are some of the minor improvements to the user interface. We've already seen this briefly, you may have noticed. These improvements are intended to make these screens easier to use. So the first one we're going to look at is the top of reports. And you may remember that they were cluttered with large buttons and select lists and many rows. And it just made it harder to simply view the report that you were running. So the arrows that were big buttons for viewing past and future periods are still here. They're just incorporated into the date range. And so we can still view past and future periods for our reports. And all the rest of the options that you used to see up here have been consolidated into a menu that you can just hover and one click to do what you need to do. And so you see that you have the options to modify, to view this in other formats. If I were in Internet Explorer right now, I would have the option to view as a cube report here as well, and then also to save your output. So all the options you had before, you just can now mouse over to the left and one click to do what it is that you need to do. Now, timekeeping has a similar menu, the single click menu right here. And what we replaced here were a bunch of selection boxes. You can see now there's a single row of select boxes. There used to be 4 rows, and they were rather confusing. And so now I can simply select the timesheets or the expense sheets, etc., that I want to work with, and select and go to the menu to decide if I'm going to do some master timekeeping for them or submit them for approval. So again, it just makes it a little quicker and easier to understand what you're doing on the screen. And then the last user interface change that we'll take a look at involves leave requests. Going to the wrong spot. And let me change our date here so that we'll pull some in. There we go. So previously an employee's accrual balances were only visible on their timesheets. And now we carry over this information to the screens where they request leave and where managers are approving that leave, so that it's easy to verify that employees have enough paid leave to take the requested time off. So it's a little bit of extra reference information. You don't have to navigate elsewhere to look it up. 9.5 also includes an alternative to the current leave request screen, the creation screen for your employees, to make it easier for them when they need to request many days of leave at once. So a few other miscellaneous features that are worth mentioning. The comment field on your entry screens used to have a maximum character count of 225, and it can now hold up to 2,000 characters. Now, after you migrate, you will need to update your screens to take advantage of that 2,000 character limit. So you'll just have to change that to whatever limit you want to place there, up to 2,000 characters. So this is good if you are, if your use involves tracking detailed comments in that comment screen. Will give you some extra space. We've also added some new import tools. Imports for currency and custom conversions. And this, if you track a lot of custom conversions tied to, for example, that equipment tracking screen, or you are constantly updating your currency conversions and you have employees tracking expenses in a lot of different currencies, these new imports allow you to manage those much more easily than you could in the user interface. For those of you who are using Journyx PX, Your system settings for resource management that were previously under project settings now have their own area. This is just letting you know that they've moved. They had become large enough, there were enough settings that we decided to break them out from your project settings. So they didn't go away, they just moved. So that completes the review of our individual features in the 9.5 release. The new rate options give you greater flexibility in planning, monitoring, and reporting on your project costs and billable hours. Several of the new configuration options make it even easier for your employees to get their time entered accurately and reduce that need for corrections during the approval process. And the user interface changes increase your ability to just get things done quickly. So at this time, I'll go ahead and start answering questions. Remember, if you have a question, please use the chat section of your GoToPanel and send the chat to both organizers and panelists so that I'll be able to see it. So far, I have no questions. Truly nobody has a question? Wow, I must have done a good job today. Well, as I mentioned, we will have very detailed upgrader guides for you to work through before you upgrade so that you can take a look, understand what you might want to use or not use. Nothing will be turned on automatically. The way we work it is we give you access to these new features and you can choose to use them or not. We will also have some classes associated with learning how to use some of these features. And of course, please feel free to email us if you think of a question afterwards that you didn't think of while we were going through the presentation. All right, one last call for questions. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for your time and have a great day.